What if I told you that around 80% of China's imported oil has historically passed through a strip of water only 2.7 kilometers wide? And what if China wasn't the one controlling it? That's the exact situation China found itself in. Every single day, massive tankers loaded with crude oil squeeze through the Strait of Malacca, carrying the fuel that keeps Chinese factories running, cities lit, and an entire economy moving. And here's the problem. China doesn't control this route. Not even close. The strait sits between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia, in waters where the United States Navy maintains a strong presence. So China's energy lifeline runs straight through territory it can't secure on its own. Analysts have a name for this. They call it the Malacca Dilemma, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Imagine building an entire economy on top of a supply line that could be choked off by a blockade, a conflict, or even a single accident. That's not a hypothetical risk. That's the reality China has been living with for decades. So what do you do when your energy supply depends on a choke point you don't control? You build a way around it. And that's exactly what China did, spending roughly $7 billion on a pipeline system that cuts straight across Myanmar, bypassing the Strait of Malacca altogether. Today, we're breaking down how this pipeline actually works, why it took years to build, and whether it really solves the problem it was designed to fix. Let's start with the concept, because on paper, it almost sounds too simple. Bring oil in on Myanmar's western coast, unload it, then pipe it overland directly into China. No strait, no choke point, no dependence on a single vulnerable shipping lane. The starting point is a port called Chokepoints, sitting on the Bay of Bengal. From there, two separate pipelines run northeast across Myanmar, before crossing into China's Yunnan province and eventually reaching Kunming. These aren't two products sharing one pipe. They're two completely independent systems built side by side. The first carries natural gas and has been operating since 2013. The second carries crude oil and opened in 2017 specifically to reduce China's dependence on the Strait of Malacca. Now, if the idea is this straightforward, why didn't anyone build it sooner? Because drawing a line across a map is easy. Building one is something else entirely. Across Myanmar alone, the pipelines stretch roughly 770 kilometers. Once connected to China's domestic network, the system extends well beyond 2,500 kilometers, feeding directly into inland refineries. The oil pipeline can transport about 440,000 barrels every day, enough to supply a major industrial region, while the gas pipeline carries around 12 billion cubic meters annually. But laying pipe is only the beginning. Every few dozen kilometers, pumping stations keep the crude moving while compressor stations push the gas forward. Pressure has to remain stable across mountains, forests, and changing elevations. In many places, there weren't even proper roads before construction began, so crews first had to build the infrastructure needed just to bring heavy equipment to the site. It's one of those projects that looks surprisingly simple on a map, but becomes enormously complex once construction actually starts. So here's the real question. Does routing oil through Myanmar actually solve China's Malacca problem? The mechanics are surprisingly straightforward. Tankers arriving from the Middle East or Africa no longer need to sail all the way to China's eastern coastline. Instead, many can unload much earlier at Chokepoints, where the oil is transferred directly into storage tanks connected to the pipeline. From that point on, the journey continues over land. Compared to the traditional route through the Indian Ocean, the Strait of Malacca, and then north to China's eastern ports, this alternative cuts thousands of kilometers off the shipping journey, depending on where the oil originated. More importantly, that portion of China's imports no longer depends on the strait at all. But here's the part that's easy to miss. This pipeline doesn't replace the Strait of Malacca. China still moves the overwhelming majority of its imported oil through that same narrow passage. the Myanmar pipeline handles only a fraction of total demand. What it provides isn't independence, it's redundancy, and in energy security, redundancy can be just as valuable as capacity. There's another advantage too. By bringing oil and gas directly into Yunnan province, the project strengthens China's southwest, a region that historically played a much smaller role in international trade than the country's eastern coast. Now flip the perspective and look at Myanmar. The benefits are huge on paper. The country earns transit fees on every shipment that crosses its territory. Roads, terminals, and supporting infrastructure have been built along the route. There are long-term plans, too, to expand industrial activity around Kyaukphyu port, potentially creating new jobs and investment. But every solution creates new risks. Unlike ships, pipelines can't simply change course. If political instability, sabotage, or armed conflict disrupts the route, the flow stops immediately. And Myanmar has experienced years of political unrest and regional conflict. Maintaining hundreds of kilometers of pipeline through remote terrain also creates constant operational challenges, where even relatively small repairs can become major logistical operations. So while the pipeline removes one vulnerability, it introduces another. And that's exactly why China never intended this project to stand on its own. The Myanmar pipeline wasn't the backup plan, it was only the beginning. Over the past 2 decades, China has quietly built an entire network of alternative energy corridors designed around one simple idea: never rely on a single route. To the west, massive gas pipelines bring energy from Turkmenistan through Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan into western China. Together, these routes already deliver around 55 billion cubic meters of natural gas each year, with further expansion planned. A separate oil pipeline from Kazakhstan carries crude directly across land, avoiding maritime routes altogether. To the north, the Power of Siberia pipeline connects Russia's gas fields with China and is expected to deliver up to 38 billion cubic meters annually at full capacity, while a second route remains under discussion. And to the south, China continues investing in Pakistan's Gwadar port under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Although the terrain makes a future pipeline far more challenging than Myanmar's, the strategic goal is remarkably similar: create another route that avoids vulnerable maritime choke points. Inside China itself, all of these connections feed into a domestic pipeline network stretching over 100,000 kilometers, allowing oil and gas to be redirected across the country depending on demand. Put it all together, and the strategy becomes obvious. China isn't trying to eliminate the Strait of Malacca. That would be nearly impossible. Instead, it's making sure the strait is never its only option. The Myanmar pipeline may carry less than 5% of China's imported oil, but that still represents hundreds of thousands of barrels every single day that no longer depend on one of the world's busiest and most strategically sensitive waterways. In the end, this pipeline was never really about moving oil. It was about making sure no single choke point could ever hold China's energy supply hostage. So what do you think? If you were responsible for China's energy security, would you trust one global shipping lane or build a network of backup routes stretching across half a continent? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about the engineering and technologies shaping our world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.